Welcome to Mr. Horror, where we bring you 3 true creepy Craigslist horror stories. These spine-chilling stories will make you think twice before buying and selling items online. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and let's dive into these terrifying tales. Jenna had just moved to the city and was in desperate need of some furniture for her new apartment. Being on a tight budget, she turned to Craigslist to find some second-hand pieces. After scrolling through countless listings, she stumbled upon one that caught her eye. It was a beautiful antique dresser that would be perfect for her bedroom. The price was a steal, and the seller lived just a few blocks away. Jenna quickly arranged to meet the seller that same evening. As she walked to the address, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The street was dark and deserted, with no one else around. She felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the old, run-down apartment building. Jenna knocked on the door, and after a few moments, a man in his mid-40s answered. He was tall and thin, with a greasy comb-over and a crooked smile. Jenna felt uneasy around him but tried to push the feeling aside as she inspected the dresser. As she ran her hand over the smooth wood, she noticed something odd. One of the drawers had a strange, musty smell. She tried to ignore it, but the smell grew stronger the more she looked at it. The man noticed her discomfort and quickly assured her that it was just a little mold and that it would go away with some cleaning. Jenna reluctantly agreed to buy the dresser, but as she walked back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She felt like she was being watched and kept turning around to see if anyone was following her. When she finally made it back to her apartment, she quickly locked the door behind her and collapsed onto her couch. She was exhausted and felt like she had made a mistake in buying the dresser. But it was too late now, she thought to herself, and decided to go to bed early to try and forget about the whole ordeal. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her nightmare. As Jenna lay in bed, she tried to ignore the strange noises coming from the direction of the dresser. It sounded like someone was scratching on the wood, but when she got up to investigate, there was nothing there. Over the next few days, Jenna began to experience even more unsettling events. The dresser drawers would open on their own, revealing strange objects that she didn't remember putting there. She would hear whispers and footsteps in her apartment, even though no one else was there. And worst of all, she began to have terrifying nightmares that left her feeling drained and afraid. Jenna knew that something was seriously wrong with the dresser, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. It was like it had a hold on her, and she couldn't escape its grip. One day, Jenna came home from work to find that her apartment had been ransacked. The dresser had been completely emptied, and all of her other belongings were scattered around the room. It was clear that someone had been searching for something, but she couldn't figure out what. As she sifted through the mess, Jenna found a piece of paper with a strange symbol on it. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and she felt a deep sense of dread wash over her. Jenna knew that she had to get rid of the dresser before it was too late, but as she tried to move it out of her apartment, she found that it was too heavy to lift. It was like it was rooted to the floor, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't budge it. Jenna was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and she knew that she had to find a way to break free before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and Jenna was unable to escape the grip of the cursed dresser. She had tried everything she could think of to get rid of it, but it seemed like it was indestructible. The strange occurrences continued to happen, and Jenna felt like she was losing her mind. One night, as Jenna lay in bed, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the direction of the dresser. She tried to ignore it, but it grew louder and more persistent. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and got up to investigate. As she approached the dresser, she saw that the scratches were forming a pattern. It was the same symbol that she had seen on the piece of paper that she had found when her apartment had been ransacked. Jenna knew that this was her chance to break the curse. She had to destroy the dresser and the symbol that was etched into it. With all of her strength, she grabbed a hammer and started to smash the dresser to pieces. The wood splintered and cracked under the force of her blows until there was nothing left but rubble. As the dust settled, Jenna felt a sense of relief wash over her. The curse had been broken, and she was finally free. She knew that she would never be able to explain what had happened to her, but she was grateful to be alive. From that day on, Jenna swore that she would never again use Craigslist to buy anything. She knew that there were too many dangers lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims. And although she would never forget the terror that she had experienced, she was glad that she had found the strength to overcome it. Mike was a father of 2 young boys and loved to buy and sell iPhones for a little extra income. He would scour Craigslist for deals, snatch up phones for cheap, and then flip them for a profit. One day, he came across a listing for an iPhone X that was priced way lower than it should be. Mike couldn't believe his luck and quickly arranged to meet the seller in a parking lot near his home. As he arrived at the meeting spot, he noticed a man standing near a car, holding the iPhone. Mike approached him, and they quickly struck a deal. The man seemed normal enough, and Mike didn't think much of it when he left with the phone. But as he drove away, he began to feel a creeping sense of unease. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. When he got home and examined the phone, he realized that it was completely fake. The screen was made of plastic, and the insides were just a jumble of wires and cheap parts. Mike felt angry and ripped off, but he also felt a sense of fear. Who was this man, and why did he have a fake iPhone? As the days went by, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He noticed a strange car parked on his street that seemed to be there all the time, and whenever he went out to buy or sell phones, he felt like someone was following him. Mike tried to convince himself that he was just being paranoid, but then he started receiving strange messages from unknown numbers. The messages would be nonsensical, but they always seemed to be watching him, knowing his every move. Mike realized that he had stumbled into something much more sinister than a simple phone scam, and he knew that he needed to figure out who was behind it before it was too late. Mike became obsessed with finding out who was behind the fake iPhone scam and the strange messages he was receiving. He spent hours scrolling through Craigslist, trying to match the phone number of the seller with any other listings or messages he had received. As he dug deeper, he began to uncover a network of fake sellers and buyers who seemed to be working together to target unsuspecting victims like him. They would use fake names and burner phones to communicate, and always insisted on meeting in secluded areas or at odd hours of the day. Mike knew that he needed to put a stop to their operation before they could hurt anyone else. He contacted the local police and provided them with all the information he had gathered, hoping that they could track down the scammers. But as he waited for the police to act, Mike's fears continued to escalate. He started having nightmares about being followed and attacked by the scammers, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on him. One day, Mike received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, he heard nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. He quickly hung up, but the call left him shaken. It was clear that the scammers knew he was onto them, and they weren't going to let him go without a fight. Mike knew that he had to be careful and watch his back, but he also knew that he couldn't let them win. Determined to put an end to the scam once and for all, Mike continued to work with the police to track down the scammers. It was a long and difficult process, but eventually they were able to make several arrests and shut down the operation. Mike was relieved that the scammers were finally behind bars, but he knew that the experience had changed him forever. He realized that the world could be a dangerous place, and that sometimes even the simplest of transactions could lead to unexpected and terrifying consequences. From then on, Mike was much more cautious when buying and selling phones online. He also made sure to always meet in public places and never give out personal information to strangers. But despite his newfound caution, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The experience had left him with a lingering sense of paranoia and fear. One day, several months after the scam had been shut down, Mike was walking to his car after work when he heard someone call out his name. He turned around and saw a man standing a few feet away, watching him intently. Mike didn't recognize the man, but something about him seemed familiar. The man took a step forward, and Mike felt his heart racing. But then the man spoke. "Hey, are you the guy who helped bust that iPhone scam a while back?" he asked. Mike felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was just a stranger thanking him for his help. But as he drove home, he couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't just a coincidence that the man knew who he was? What if the scammers were still out there, watching him, waiting for their chance to strike again? Mike tried to push the thought out of his mind, but he knew that he would never be able to forget the fear and uncertainty that the Craigslist scam had brought into his life. It was a typical Saturday morning when Sarah decided to browse through Craigslist for some affordable furniture. She had recently moved into a new apartment and needed to furnish it on a budget. As she scrolled through the ads, she stumbled upon a post that caught her attention, a beautiful antique dresser for a fraction of its retail price. Without hesitation, Sarah reached out to the seller and arranged to meet him that afternoon at his house. The seller's name was Tom, and he seemed friendly and accommodating over the phone. He gave her his address and promised to have the dresser ready for her to pick up. When Sarah arrived at Tom's house, she was struck by how rundown and isolated it looked. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the paint on the house was chipped and faded, but she brushed it off, thinking that Tom was probably just an eccentric antique collector. Tom greeted her at the door, and Sarah was immediately taken aback by his appearance. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes. He seemed nervous and fidgety as he led her to the back of the house where the dresser was stored. As Sarah inspected the dresser, Tom's behavior became increasingly strange. He kept staring at her intently, and his breathing grew heavier. Sarah tried to ignore it and focused on examining the piece of furniture. But when she leaned in to get a closer look, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around to see Tom standing behind her, his face inches away from hers. His eyes were wild and manic, and his grip on her shoulder was tight. Sarah tried to pull away, but he only tightened his grip. "You're not leaving," he hissed. "You're staying with me forever." Sarah's heart raced as she struggled to break free from Tom's grip. She kicked and screamed, but he was too strong for her. She knew she had to think fast if she wanted to survive. In a moment of desperation, Sarah reached for the first thing she could find, a vase on a nearby table. She smashed it over Tom's head, causing him to stagger back in pain. Sarah seized the opportunity to make a run for it. She sprinted through the house, searching for an escape route, but every door and window was locked or boarded up. She could hear Tom's footsteps closing in on her, and she knew she was running out of time. Finally, she stumbled upon a small trapdoor in the floor. With no other options left, she lifted it up and crawled inside. The space was cramped and dusty, but it was her only chance. She huddled in the corner and held her breath as she heard Tom's footsteps getting closer and closer. For what felt like hours, Sarah waited in the dark, suffocating space. She could hear Tom searching for her, muttering to himself about how he would never let her go. But eventually, the footsteps faded away, and Sarah knew she was safe, at least for now. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. She told them everything that had happened and gave them Tom's address. Within minutes, the police arrived and apprehended Tom. Sarah was traumatized by the experience and never bought anything off Craigslist again, but she was grateful to be alive and vowed to never take her safety for granted again. Tom was charged with attempted kidnapping and assault, and he was eventually sentenced to life in prison. Sarah attended the trial, wanting to see justice served for what he had put her through. Although she had survived the terrifying ordeal, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability and fear that had been instilled in her. She started attending therapy sessions to deal with the trauma and worked on rebuilding her life. Over time, Sarah found solace in her friends and family who had supported her through her darkest moments. She also became an advocate for safety awareness, warning others about the dangers of buying and selling items online. As the years passed, Sarah eventually moved on from the experience, but it remained a part of her story. She never forgot the fear and the desperation she felt that day, and it served as a constant reminder to stay vigilant and never take her safety for granted. The Craigslist incident became a cautionary tale in her community, and Sarah hoped that others would learn from her experience and stay safe when making online transactions. Despite the trauma, she found strength in knowing that she had survived and that her story could help others avoid similar situations. Thanks for watching these 3 true creepy Craigslist horror stories. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling horror stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications by hitting the bell icon to never miss an upload. We'll be posting more horror stories like these, so stay tuned and stay safe out there. And if you have any scary stories of your own, feel free to share them in the comments below. See you by the next video.